Are you a radio enthusiast?
A research student.
Or a curious thinker looking for an adventure?
If this sounds like you, welcome to
This
The
summer
Summer I
I
Found
found
My
my
Spark.
spark.
My name is Macy.
And I'm Errah. We're thrilled to be back for another exciting semester of interviewing Adelphi's brightest minds. In this podcast, we ask current research students about their journey of discovering their research topics, the gruesome process of reaching out to mentors, their successes and setbacks, and their future goals ahead. We hope this podcast can guide our listeners in their own path of research and self-discovery.
This episode is brought to you in collaboration with the Sparks Research Center, where curiosity meets innovation. Each summer, the Sparks Center funds students to take on independent research projects across various disciplines. Whether you're interested in computer sciences, dance, literature, or public health, there is something for every listener with a curious take on life. So keep your ears sharp, for this podcast might just leave you inspired or searching for your own spark. To find out more, please visit the Sparks Instagram page and website linked in our description.
Today, we're joined by Dr. Banka, a women's health researcher and endocrinology scholar whose work has focused on reproductive medicine, cholesterol metabolism, and the role of estrogen in women's health. Dr. Banka received her MS from Adelphi University, her PhD from the UCSF School of Medicine, followed by postdoctoral training at UC San Diego. She has held multiple faculty positions at the Scripps Research Institute and the Loyola Institute for Molecular Medicine, and later served as an associate project scientist in the Department of Medicine at UC San Diego until her retirement in 2018. Throughout her career, Dr. Banka published more than 40 research papers and contributed to the American Heart Association's guidelines for cardiovascular disease prevention in women. Dr. Banka, thank you so much for joining us today. We're so excited to have you on our podcast.
I'm very excited to be here.
Okay, so before we dive any deeper, we have many non-scientist listeners on our show. So Dr. Banka, can you explain your research a little bit so that researchers or so that listeners can follow along? How are hormones related to cardiovascular disease?
Well, what we found in our work with mice and what has subsequently been confirmed in women is that estrogen, if administered at the time of menopause or within 10 years of menopause, is actually protective from heart disease in women. And that's the simplistic way of summarizing much of my research over my career.
Wow.
In your time at Adelphi and then UCSF, what inspired you to pursue research on reproductive hormones? Was there a particular research project or a mentor that really inspired you to pursue this later on as well?
Well, I have to be thankful for Dr. Howard Grobe, who unfortunately is no longer with us. He was not my thesis advisor, but he taught a spectacular endocrinology course that I just hook, line, and sinker. I was, taken in by particularly reproductive endocrinology. So the theme through pretty much everything I've done through starting with my PhD and then 2 different postdoctoral positions and on through my professional career really all harkens back to reproductive endocrinology.
And was this course at Adelphi or UCS?
Yes.
Really?
Oh, I'm sorry. I meant to imply that. Yes, Dr. Grobe, I believe, became dean of the biology department after I had graduated. He had a joint appointment to NYU, and I know he became a dean somewhere, but I'm thinking it was probably here. But his course here at Adelphi definitely started me on the path.
Oh, that's interesting. I actually mean to take that course next semester, so now it gets me excited.
Yeah.
Yes, we love hearing when our professors, make a nice impact like that. It's wonderful. So can you tell us a little bit more about what this hormonal research actually looks like? So how do you go about conducting the experiments with the mice, and how is it relevant to the human female body?
Well, we started our first study with female mice that had their LDL receptor genetically obliterated, basically. We know that high LDL, which is the bad cholesterol, is a factor in heart disease. Mice don't have heart attacks. You'll never see a mouse keel over from a heart attack. So we had to use a mouse that was genetically engineered to to potentially have heart disease. So we chose first to look at the LDL receptor knockout mouse, whose LDL levels, because they're missing the receptor to clear it to the liver, their LDL levels go sky high. So we thought, well, this animal will probably get atherosclerotic plaque due to the high LDL levels. So we, when I say we, I removed the ovaries. The ovaries are about the size of that little speck right there. And I had to teach myself. I was at the Scripps Research Institute at the time I started these studies. We had 2 vets on staff. And neither one of them had a clue how to take an ovary out of a mouse. So I was self-taught.
Wow.
I spent hours, and unfortunately I lost a couple mice along the way.
No.
And of course it was all done under anesthesia, so they didn't feel any pain. But I mastered it to the point where I did hundreds of mice and very rarely lost, a mouse. But interestingly, for all of the studies I did, I never allowed my graduate students or my postdocs to do the surgery. That was mine. I think I had dreamed as a young woman of being a surgeon in a day when women didn't get to be surgeons. And so this was my chance to do surgery. So the answer to your question is we removed the ovaries. For a control animal, I would pull the ovary out, but leave it attached to split splay, pop it back into the mouse, suture up the mouse, and that was the control, so that the animal went through the same surgical stress that all the other animals did. And then there would be animals that we simply removed the ovary from and stitch up. But then we had animals where we added back estradiol, 2 different forms of estradiol. And finally, we used intact males as sort of just out of interest, because we weren't sure in those days whether males or females of that strain got more atherosclerosis. And as it turned out, the males got more than our control females. But the placebo-treated females got twice as much atherosclerosis as any other animal in the study. And estrogen completely eliminated that increase. So estrogen was doing something. We know that estrogen upregulates LDL receptors, but we had removed that mechanism from the equation because these animals didn't have LDL receptors. So that meant that estrogen was protecting the animals, and it wasn't through mediating LDL levels. And so this kind of opened a whole little Pandora's box for people to look at mechanism, and we went on to study various aspects.
That sounds fascinating and painful. Yeah, I mean, you talked about how the male mice exhibited a higher LDL, and we also know that recent research, and it's been going on for a while, also detects that there's a higher incidence of cardiovascular disease-related deaths in men than in women.
Until menopause.
Until menopause. Oh, okay.
After menopause, women very quickly catch up with men.
Oh.
And shall we guess why? Because they no longer have estrogen.
Which is the determining factor there. That makes sense.
So if you were to get a little deeper into it, what protective mechanism does estrogen have that prevents this?
Okay. Number one, it protects the endothelium, which is the single cell lining of every blood vessel. So a colleague of mine, Douglas Sordo, injured endothelium in a vessel wall, an artery wall, and then measured how long it took to repair. And he found that repair meant much more quickly in the presence than in the absence of estrogen. So it enhanced endothelial cell division so that there were more cells. On the other hand, it inhibits smooth muscle cell proliferation, which is a large component of atherosclerotic plaque formation, is thickening of the smooth muscle cell layer of the artery. And the other thing it does that's interesting is it stimulates nitric oxide production, and nitric oxide causes vasodilation. So it improves the pressure in the vascular system. And we're still looking at other mechanisms. I mean, estrogen is a sort of a miracle molecule. I know I'm biased, but those are sort of the main. And the interesting thing is that the Women's Health Initiative was set up to ask these questions in women. And about, I think, 6 years into the study, they stopped the arm with women who were taking estrogen and progestin. They stopped it early because they saw an increased risk for stroke and heart disease. It hadn't become significant, but they knew it would if this trend continued. So all of a sudden, women all over America stopped taking estrogen. Doctors wouldn't prescribe it. My phone rang off the hook, panicking friends. What do I do about my estrogen, etc.? And years later, they broke down the numbers in the Women's Health Initiative on the basis of the age of the participants. And they discovered that for all the women who entered the trial between the ages of 50 and 60, which are the 10 years usually that follow menopause, they were all protected from heart disease.
Wow.
So for decades, women were denied estrogen treatment because the data hadn't been, hadn't been parceled out as it should have been.
And if I may ask, what was the demographic or the ethnicity of the sample that they originally did it on?
That's a good question. I cannot answer that. There were, I can't even answer how many women were in the trial. I'm thinking about the Nurses' Health Study now, and there were 275,000 women, 3 generations in the Nurses' Health Study. And that's where we had our first glimmer of the idea that the hormones were protective. So that was actually the reason for designing the Women's Health Initiative, because the Nurses' Health Study was observational. There was no intervention at all, whereas the Women's Health was a double-blind, placebo-controlled trial of placebo, estrogen, or estrogen and progestin. And unfortunately, they didn't pay attention to the age of the women that went into that trial because they had to have huge numbers. And so they took all comers.
They'd want those limiting factors. That makes sense. So, okay, you've mentioned a little bit about how there were limitations in the past when you mentioned, women not being able to participate in surgery and some of the limitations when it comes to studying women and women's health. And over the course of your career, women's health has evolved and expanded tremendously. So what changes in the field have been the most exciting or promising to you throughout your career?
Well, first of all, when I was considering going to medical school, there was a 10% quota on women. I mean, and that was hard stop, 10%. I went to a medical school interview in Pennsylvania. I gave up my big college weekend because they invited me for an interview, and was told that at the admissions meeting the week before, they had been told that the quota for women for the following year was filled. So why was I there for an interview? And now at UCSF, I also believe at UCSD, the medical classes are more than 50% women. And to me, that's the biggest thrill. Okay.
Absolutely.
That my granddaughter will never face, that, I mean, not that she wants to go into medicine. She's too smart for that. She wants to be in finance. But that you ladies will never face that sort of problem. And the Women's Health Initiative, for all of its flaws, was a wonderful, it was the largest study of women that's ever been conducted. It had 6 arms. So 3 of those arms had to do with estrogen and progestin, but one had to do with nutrition. I can't even remember what the other 2 were, but it was finally a chance for women to be studied. And we had NIH come down in the 90s with a dictum that if you did not include women in your studies, you could not count on being funded.
Really?
That you would not be funded.
Wow.
I think that was in, I can't remember if it was maybe 93 or 97. Years later, they put the same admonishment on animal researchers because it would make me crazy. I mean, paper after paper. They used the male mice because they wanted the females to make more baby mice for their studies, right?
Mm.
And so paper after paper after paper would come out about every type of transgenic mouse you can imagine, and it would all be the male animals. And I just sit there saying, but what about the females? And yet, and I was on study sections for NIH. And so if I got a grant like that, I would actually make a critique of the fact that they weren't including female animals. But if I weren't the one critiquing, nobody on the study section even noticed that this was unusual, you know.
Yeah.
And so NIH finally came out in I want to say the 2010s with the same admonishment that if you did not include female animals, unless you were studying, for example, prostate cancer, that you would not be funded.
No, that's
So those are those 3 changes: the Women's Health Initiative, the NIH dictation that you had to include female humans, and then their demand that you include female animals in your studies are probably the biggest events in my lifetime, my research lifetime.
Wow. That's so wonderful. I think that seeing that type of advocacy exist in a space where it wasn't previously there is such a night and day difference. Being able to see people are finally taking that into consideration where it wasn't even on the plate before. The presence of women in these spaces, both academically and just existing in medical research, is such, like, it's astounding to think that that was even at some point not considered at all, as if that entire percentage of the population just didn't exist. That's insane to think that that was all within your professional timeline.
Well, I would go to national meetings and I'd go to walk to the microphone after the talk had been given, and I'd see all the men's eyes. He's going to ask about females. Exactly. And what did you find in your female animals? Oh, we did not study the female animals. But I mean, I just kept doing it. I kept doing it and doing it. And the other thing that I think where I made a difference, and I know people would tease me about it, particularly at the American Heart Association, about the fact that, I was always at the microphone, but it finally worked. The other thing was there were these awards given for postdocs, and they were called Young Investigator Awards. So you had to be under 35, I believe, for this award. So if you were to look, for instance, at women who dropped out at the age, say, of 30 to have a child, and then come back into the field when their child reached grade school age, so they were 36 or 37, they were not eligible for the Young Investigators Award. There were really men who dropped out for any reason.
Of
course.
So when I was on the Council for American Heart Association, I just jumped up and down because I was one of the people who came back in. I had dropped out. I had taken a hiatus between college and Adelphi. Then I was forced to take 2 years between Adelphi and graduate school because of my husband's naval career. Then I had babies. Then my husband suffered a stroke, and I had to take 3 years off to take care of him. So by the time I was ready for my second postdoc, when I would have been a perfect candidate for the Young Investigator Award, it was 1980. 37 and I was 33, and I think you had to be under 30 for this award. So I stomped up and down for years and years, and they finally changed the name of the award, I believe, to the Early Investigation Award.
Wonderful.
And they took the age limit off, and instead said you could not be assistant professor for more than 2 years to apply for this, so that they were getting assistant professors and postdocs, and women could apply.
Wow.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, in some ways, that may have been greater than any of my research contributions.
Definitely.
Well, it's those invisible like limitations that you might not realize until you're actively experiencing it. You're saying there's a flaw in this system that's marginalizing this whole group of people where you may have not realized because it wasn't a consideration when you were making the policies to begin with. It's wonderful advocacy.
Yeah.
Research, doesn't need to be linear, and the fact that you took the initiative to recognize the labor, like women's labor, which often goes invisible, I think that was a great thing.
We also established, there were 4 of us women who established a, what do we call it? The Women's Leadership Awards at the American Heart Association. And we established a luncheon every year at the big AHA meetings where we gave awards to specifically women researchers and women who had played specific leadership roles. And that was very cool to recognize these women for that.
So it's been 30 years since 1997 when NIH first approached you to include women in your research. And now we're seeing something more backwards. We are seeing a lot of those labs being defunded, or just women's health research being in the pits of hell. How do you, as a researcher, as a women's advocate, as someone who's pioneered this research for women and beyond, how do you feel about that?
This administration put out a list of words that, if they appeared in an NIH grant, would sink them.
Really?
Oh, yeah. One of the words was woman.
Wow.
No.
So it's not just women's health research, but it's all research. America, the one area in which there was no question that America was superior to all other countries in the world, was medical research. If you want to make it in medical research in another country, if you want to become a department chair in a medical school, anything like that, you had to come and do time in the United States. And so what we've done now is we've decreased the funding. Anything that has DEI or the word women, anything ethnic, it just isn't going to get funded. I have colleagues who are preeminent researchers. I mean, Scripps Research Institute is one of the great research institutes in the United States. I have a colleague who I ran into a couple months ago. I hadn't seen her in forever because she was really busy running a lab, right?
Mm-hmm.
She gave up and retired because, first of all, her grant didn't get reviewed at all because they shut down the NIH. And so a whole, and grants are reviewed every 3 months. So if you miss that 3 months, you will go for 3 months without funding. And that's what happened to everybody whose grant went in at that time.
Wow.
And then she heard that her grant was being reviewed. Then she heard that it was a very good chance of her being funded, but that it wouldn't be for a year and a half. In the meantime, she had to lay off everyone in her lab. And she was 75, and she said, I quit. And she walked away. What really upset me, because I was in charge of the animal facility at a small institute where I worked, was the idea that you could have put years of research into a colony of animals. Maybe they were genetically modified and you had created them as a genetically modified strain. or you were doing a long-term, say 6-month study of the influence of a high-fat diet, whatever it might be, the cage charges for those animals are astronomical. And you have your grant taken away. You have no way to pay for those cage charges. You have to kill all those animals.
Wow.
And I cannot imagine how many research animals were sacrificed because money had been taken away from the investigator who was doing the studies. So and I had a friend who was invited to China with a group of Nobel laureates. This was maybe 10 or 15 years ago, maybe longer. And she came back and said they had the most magnificent laboratories in China that she had ever seen, but they had no people in them.
Oh my goodness.
Because they didn't have the training. Guess what? All those people who were coming to the U.S. Because they needed to do time in the U.S. to progress in their own countries, guess where they're going to go?
China.
They're going to go to China. So we're shooting ourselves in the foot. There's no question that if this goes on for, even a year longer, I would say we will lose our preeminence in medical research in the world. And it's really tragic.
It's heavy. You just listen to this. But I think hope is still an important thing to have in research, even if it's difficult to gather that in face of everything that's happened administratively.
I agree.
Go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt.
No
I
worries.
agree with you, and I don't mean to be a downer because it doesn't mean you shouldn't think about going into research. Research is, in fact, I had planned to be a medical school professor and teach gross anatomy. And I got so hooked on research that instead I pursued a research career and gave up the idea of teaching altogether, because research is, I love teaching, don't get me wrong, but research, you wake up every morning and you see the results from the day before and you have a whole new question to ask. It's always changing, and that will never change. And we will get through this time.
Completely.
And we will build back.
It's a very hopeful message. I think that's something that's really helpful to hear from all sorts of people who are seeing this type of change happen and who feel a lot of fear. So a lot of our listener demographic are college students, women and other people as well in their 20s. So although many of us are not going through menopause anytime soon, what health advice do you believe that every woman should focus on? Any preventative care or anything like that?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. That's kind of what I'm doing with my life now. I'm teaching a lot about women's health. And I say to myself now at 81, boy, if I had known this when I was 35, I would be so much healthier. Pay attention to your health. Pay attention to your weight. Pay attention to your diet. Try to reduce the meat in your diet. We have come to find out that people on a vegan diet are so much healthier. My two grandchildren who live with me were raised vegan. I think my grandson, did not miss a single day of school from kindergarten through 12th grade. And my granddaughter missed maybe 4 or 5 days, but she, of course, had female things that my grandson didn't have to cope with. So, pay attention to your diet. The newest thing for me is UPFs, ultra processed foods. And I did not know of this concept till about 6 months ago or so. And so I loved Twinkies. I've loved Twinkies all my life, but really limit your Twinkies. So pay attention to your nutrition, to your weight. Have your annual checkups so you know about blood pressure and there are many silent killers out there. One is blood pressure. Another is ovarian cancer. There are many things that can happen, and sometimes to very young people that we don't know about because we don't monitor. ovarian cancer can be easily detected with a transvaginal sonogram, but it has been decided in this country that the cost of a routine transvaginal sonogram is not outweighed by the number of lives you'd save by catching it early. So, that's it's a drawback of our medical system in some ways. But just be and exercise. Have an exercise program that you enjoy. If you don't like the exercise, you won't do the exercise. So, that's what I would start with. And then, of course, when you hit your late 40s, early 50s, you have to make decisions about how to manage menopause and the symptoms thereof.
Yeah, I learned that the last part of exercise the hard way, where I tried everything, and I was like, okay, this is what I like now. But here at PAWS Radio, we have something we'd like to call the "Oh no" moments. So this is when the project idea you spent weeks refining on gets shut down, or the results you were hoping to get backfires. So, but as researchers know, failure is fundamental to research as success. Have you had any "Oh no" moments during your project? And if so, how did you deal with those rejections and setbacks?
Probably my biggest oh no was during my doctoral program at UCSF, when it became clear that the first project that my advisor and I had designed might not work. So I had my first qualifying exam. You have to do an oral exam before you're advanced to candidacy for the PhD, and if you don't pass it, they'll suggest maybe you'd like to have a master's degree and go home. So I had my first meeting with my committee, and my PhD advisor had brought champagne, and she had ordered lunch for everybody in the lab, and we went off. And when we came back from my meeting, she literally opened a champagne bottle and poured it over my head, because all of the faculty on my committee had said that my project was not going to work, and they would not give it the seal of approval.
That is so harsh.
I had to start from scratch
Oh,
after
no.
2 years, which is why it took me, I think, 7.5 years to finish the degree. And I already had my master's from Adelphi, right? But I did love being in school, so I couldn't complain too much. So we had to redesign a whole new project, and we did, and it was successful. My committee felt it was okay, and I defended my thesis and graduated, or my dissertation, and graduated, and went on to become a postdoc and not worry about it anymore. But that was probably the biggest oh no moment, because anything else was a small setback where you could take the data and say, oh, well, maybe instead it means this, and then you design a different experiment to ask that question. So, but
the process was glorious.
Yeah, but when your whole project gets shut down, it's not very happy.
Well, we have one final question for you. There are many students who are and will be working on their thesis or their capstone projects, or applying to research grant opportunities. Do you have any advice for those students who want to pursue research but feel overwhelmed and confused by the process? If you could go back to the beginning of your research journey, what wisdom would you impart to yourself?
Rely heavily on your faculty and your advisors. They've been there, and it's really part of their role in life to assist you. Don't be intimidated. I have to tell you, having applied for NIH grants, and I was funded by many agencies, including NIH, but for every 3 grants you apply for, you probably get 1. So you have to be prepared to accept rejection. You have to be prepared that if you write an application and it's something where you'll get a critique, you can't take the critique personally. It's just about whatever you're writing about. It's about the science. It's not about you. And I think sometimes women have a harder time taking things not personally, maybe than men do, although I'm so much older than you ladies that I may be completely wrong about that. But just use all the resources you have available. There are great resources here at Adelphi. They're even better, I'm sure, than when I was here. So just take a deep breath and plunge in, and don't be discouraged if people say no once in a while. Just keep trying.
Just keep going. Like, don't worry. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Banka, for joining us today. Thank you so much, Dr. Banka, for joining us today. We're so grateful for your time and for sharing your arduous but successful journey with our listeners. And if our listeners have questions about Dr. Banka's project or would like to collaborate in any way, you may contact her via her email, which is included in the episode description.
And thank you to the Spark Research Center for sponsoring this episode and continuing to support student innovation across campus. If you want to learn more about how to get involved with Spark or to apply for next summer's program, check out their page on the university website. We'll link it in the episode description.
That wraps up today's episodes of The Summer I Found My Spark. Until next time, I'm Errah.
And I'm Maci. Stay tuned, stay curious, and keep reaching for your spark.